Let's look at the basics of lighting an image, starting with Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. Here is my raw image opened in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to start by using a recipe that I developed for lighting my images, and that's under the Global Lighting tab, either in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. Now, one might think that starting with exposure is where you need to go, but truly it is not. Let's say, for instance, that I only use the exposure slider to correct the underexposed image. I'm going to put this up at one full stop. And as you can see, I'm getting broad, flat light. And the center of the image is still in need of more light. I'm going to make a snapshot of this image, and we'll come back to it in just a bit. This is where sculpting the light begins. Instead of starting with the exposure slider, I'm going to start with contrast, which I will lower to -10. Next, I'm going to move down to my highlights, and I'm going to take this down to between -25 and -30. And I'm going to stop at -27. Now we come to the shadows slider. While not every image needs a lot of mid-tone lift, which is what you're going to get with the shadow slider, I'm usually very generous with the shadow slider. And in this case, I'm going to take this up to +70. While it didn't do a lot in this specific image, the benefits of opening up the shadow areas of an image are very powerful. And whenever you work on an image, you're going to want to up your shadows and see what it can do. Next is the white slider, and I'm going to pull this up to +70 as well. How do I know where to stop? I know where to stop because my eye is now developed for recognizing light. And here's what I see. I see that we've got nice light now around the outside of the image. Yes, it is contrasted light, but it is not pushing any of the image into a deeper contrasted state. That's why I lowered the contrast to begin with. Let's look at blacks. Blacks can open up the midtones in an image. However, you want to be very careful with blacks. And the way I start is when the black slider is at 0, I hold down the Alt or the Option key, then click on the pointer area of the slider. If I see anything on my screen except all white, I up the blacks just until they stop. If the image is all white, that's a good indication that you could lower the blacks until you begin to see just a little bit of clipping. I'm going to leave this at +8. Let's take a look at the before and after. Before and after. Before and after. That is a good difference, and we still have several steps in front of us. So let's continue. We are using global lighting, not specific local lighting, but global over the entire image. So while we're doing that, I'm going to go down to the curves panel in Adobe Camera Raw. This is also available to you in Lightroom. Now let's talk about this. We already looked at highlights, and if you remember, I lowered the highlights. But if you want highlight and you want the effect that it gives, this would be the place to raise highlights. Again, it's not doing much to the middle of the image, but it is working at the outside edge of the image. So I'm going to leave this at about +8. Next is lights, and that is almost the same thing as the whites that are here. So it is a light that has contrast in it, and that's one of the reasons that I lower the contrast slider. So as I up the lights, you'll begin to see that we're getting light, but we're getting contrast with it. And how do I know that? Because I can see contrast in the image. Now, I won't go too far with this. I'm going to leave this at about +18, just so that I have a very slight curve starting at the corner and then moving down to the middle of the histogram. Now remember, I'm not using my histogram. I'm using the sliders. It is much easier to deal with curves and get the power of curves if you will use the sliders. Next, let's look at darks. And darks can be related to exposure on the light panel. However, in the curves panel, as you lift darks, now you begin to see some relief in this midtone area where it's getting some light. And shadows is basically the same thing as shadows that we used in the light panel. But again, it's making a little bit of difference here, but not very much. So I'm going to leave this at about plus 20, the darks at plus 27. Now that we've completed global lighting for the image, it is time to add denoise if it is warranted. Let's take a look at this image. This image was shot with a much older camera back in 2017. In 2026, that is light ages ago. However, I did shoot raw, so I'm going to close this panel and I'm going to go down to denoise under the detail panel and simply click. Let's look at what it did. This is before and this is after. And I just love this. I don't have to leave Photoshop for any reason, and it does a really nice job. Now I'm going to up this to about 65, and that looks good to me. I don't want to go too far because I don't want to lose focus there. And with that in mind, I'm going to up my sharpening to about 60 to try to bring back a little bit of the sharpness here. I don't want to sacrifice the denoise, so I think a happy medium is between 55 and 60. Let's talk about local lighting. Local lighting is your friend, and you need to learn to use it. So to get local lighting, what I need to do is either click on the mask icon or touch the letter K on your keyboard if you're using Adobe Camera Raw. I am going to create a new mask and I want a brush. Now I use a fairly small brush so that I can get into these areas without overdoing it. And I'm not going to go to the outsides of this center region of the flower just yet. I'm going to create a new mask and I want a brush. Now I use a fairly small brush so that I can get into these areas without overdoing it. And I'm not going to go to the outsides of this center region of the flower just yet. I'm not going to follow my recipe strictly because I do know what I'm looking for. I know that I don't need to lower contrast. I know that I don't need to lower highlights. I'm going to try to up my shadows, but it really is not doing anything, so I'm going to leave it at 0. However, in your image, when you're working, I would highly encourage to up shadows because shadows does a lot of heavy lifting when you have mid-tone colors that do not have enough exposure. Let's go with whites. And that's doing a little something, but I don't want to go too far because I will get overexposure in the very ends of these tips where there is a lot of white. I know I don't want to touch blacks, so where does that leave me? That means that I need to use exposure. And that is working very nicely, but I don't see as much exposure here as I do here. So let me show you where I'm going from here. Now, I do like the light that it has brought in, so I'm going to go back with my brush and I'm going to touch a few of these areas where there is yellow and add a little bit of light there because I'm going to get pop. However, to get the light that I want in these areas, I'm going to add another mask. I want a brush, and now I'm going to concentrate in just these areas, making my brush smaller by using the left bracket key on my keyboard. I'm going to get in close and make sure that these areas have been selected. You could see they're selected because they show up in red. I have my color switched to red. You can use whatever color you like. Next, I'm going to go back down to the light panel, and I'm only going to go for exposure. And that's what I was looking for. I'm going to try to add a little bit more here. Let's go back to the image where we only used the exposure slider. So this is the image with the exposure slider, and this is our current image adjusted for global and local lighting. Exposure only, and using Rosie's recipe for global and local lighting. And I think that you will agree that rather than having a flat image, we have a beautifully sculpted image. But we're not done yet. Being happy with what I have so far, I'm going to open this image in Photoshop.